Kane stood in the middle of the kitchen like he owned every brick in the room. He looked me up and down, steady voice, no blink. Ugly old woman. Each word hit the cold tile like he'd been saving them for the right moment. I didn't shed a tear. I just stood there, looking at him as if marking a line he'd chosen to cross. No one walks back after saying something like that, and I think he knew it. But Kane was never someone who saw consequences sitting right in front of him. I set the paper in my hand on the table. It opened exactly where I wanted. A hotel invoice, 3 weeks, 1 room with a double bed, name on the reservation, Kane Foster, guest staying with him, blank, but the lipstick stain on the minibar receipt said more than any typed name could. He glanced down and let out a small, smug laugh, like all of this was nothing. Consider yourself lucky. I haven't kicked you out of this house yet. This house. He always talked like it was built from his own blood and sweat, like I was just some freeloader, like my existence was a debt he had to pay. I took a short breath, not to steady myself. I'd been steady for a long time. To understand this, I said, you have to go back to when everything was still quiet. When we first got married, Kane was a man full of confidence, the kind of confidence people often mistake for strength. And me, Talia, quiet and reserved, always watching while others talked. Friends used to say I could see through people's layers. But with Kane, I saw wrong. Or maybe he was better at hiding than I thought. In the early months, he was kind in a controlled sort of way, always checking my phone just to be sure, always asking where I was going for safety, always reminding me to keep my distance from male coworkers to stay proper. Back then, I didn't see the problem. But conditional kindness always comes with a price, and eventually Kane started collecting every cent of it. The first crack showed up on a Friday night. I had just walked through the door when Kane looked at me and said one simple line, "You look older." No reason behind it. No emotion. He said it like it was a fact. Something obvious, something not worth thinking about. I let out a small laugh and walked past him. But the words didn't fade. They hung in the air like smoke, clinging to my hair and my clothes. Kane started being gone more often. At first it was work, and then it was friends. Then it turned into nights he didn't bother texting at all. When I asked, he just told me not to make a big deal out of it. "You're being too sensitive." He said it like he was adjusting a broken clock. But the clock really did have a problem. Not me, but the numbers I started to see. One night, while I was reorganizing a drawer, a credit card statement slipped out. I'm not the type to invade someone's privacy, but those bright red charges didn't give me the option to look away. Hotel, fine dining, gift stores, all within the last 2 months. I stared at them like looking at footprints left by someone who was running and trying to cover their trail. Kane didn't know I'd seen them. I didn't say anything yet either. I just kept the paper, folded it neatly, and placed it inside an envelope. If there was a moment when everything truly started to crack, this was it. A small bill mixed in with ordinary things, yet it was the first piece of a much bigger picture. A picture Kane had been trying to paint over with his tone and his attitude. I didn't track him. I didn't ask more questions. I just watched. The more confident Kane became, the more he treated me like someone too dull to notice his lies. Until tonight, when I set the hotel bill in front of him and saw his eyes tighten just a bit, not with guilt, but with challenge. I looked at him longer than he expected. "You think you have the right to throw me out of this house?" My voice didn't rise. It didn't shake. "Fine. Let's see who actually gets pushed out." I said it and went quiet. And the rest Kane would figure out on his own. And he'd wish he never opened his mouth to call me that. My last words in the kitchen that night left Kane quiet for exactly 3 seconds. 3 seconds long enough for me to see irritation spark in his eyes, then disappear just as fast, like he'd flipped a switch to shift into a new role. He turned away, opened the fridge, grabbed a can of soda as if nothing had happened, and I walked out of the kitchen carrying a very different kind of silence, a silence Kane had never faced before. From that day on, Kane didn't mention the hotel bill again, but he did start talking about me, in ways that grew sharper and meaner. That shirt makes you look tired. I had just stepped out of the bedroom when he tossed that line out like a reflex. It wasn't feedback. It was a quick swipe meant to erase a bit of my confidence. Another day, when I took a moment to answer because I was thinking, Kane sighed. You're getting old, so your brain's slowing down. No hint of a joke, no glance of apology, just truth the way he wanted it to be. Then one night, when we were about to go out for dinner, he stood by the door and dropped a line so soft it cut deeper. Talia, sometimes you need to know your place. I looked at him, not because my pride was hurt, but because I was taking note of every word, every attitude, every moment he let his real self slip through. I didn't react loudly, didn't argue, didn't ask why. I just observed, the way you'd watch a building that's starting to sink, waiting to see which wall cracks first. But the words weren't the only thing that changed. His behavior changed too, slow but clear. Once, when I walked into the office, Kane yanked his phone back so fast he almost dropped it. The screen flashed just long enough for me to catch the first letter of a message, an L. He shut it off too quickly. So quickly his breathing changed with it. Another night, his phone rang at 1 a.m. Kane muttered a quick, client, but the voice he used to answer was completely different, softer, lower. I caught the faint sound of a woman laughing on the other end. He stepped out of the room and closed the door behind him, like even the air in our bedroom might overhear. Then came the restaurant bill table for 2 right, at the time he'd claimed to be in a meeting. I held the paper, looked at Kane's signature at the bottom, and knew exactly who he'd spent that lunch with. Her name wasn't hard to find. Lara. It showed up in an email accidentally sent to our shared account, a thank you message for a gift Kane had given her, and a little see you tonight at the end, making every piece click into place. But I didn't confront him. I didn't ask, who is she? I didn't ask, why? I let the name sit quietly in my mind. Kane didn't know, and I wanted him to believe I was still a step behind the kind of illusion men like him walk straight into until they trap themselves in their own mess. Then the first layer of the financial problem showed up. One afternoon, I opened the mailbox and found an envelope with the credit card company's logo, addressed to Kane, but sent to my house. I'm not someone who opens other people's mail, but the words past due notice, stamped in red across the front, meant the letter wasn't private anymore. It touched the house. It touched my safety. I opened it. The number was there, over $3,000, a list of charges, hotel stays, a jewelry store, fine dining. Every line matched perfectly with Kane's disappearances over the past 2 months. I didn't need to guess. The numbers told the whole story themselves. Kane wasn't just cheating. He was funding the cheating, and now he was in debt because of it. I held the letter and stood by the living room window. Outside, the street was quiet, like the whole neighborhood was waiting to see what I'd do next. But I didn't do anything. I just let that information fall into its place in the bigger picture. Then a few days later, Kane hit the final point. I had just finished paying the electric bill the same way I did every month, when Kane tossed his car keys onto the table and said, without even looking at me, "You should contribute more. I can't carry everything forever." I turned my head. Carry what? He crossed his arms, leaning against the kitchen cabinets. This house, this life. If I find someone better, I'll replace you. Those words weren't enough to hurt me. They were only enough to put Kane exactly where he belonged. A man who believed he was the center of everything, including my worth. I looked at him for a few seconds, not long, not heavy, just long enough for him to see I wasn't standing where he thought I was anymore. I'm starting to understand, I said, my voice low and cold. You didn't just cheat on me. You went into debt to fund the cheating. And for the first time since all of this began, Kane didn't answer right away. Not because he had nothing to say, but because he just realized I knew more than he thought. After that last line, Kane kept his distance for a few days, not out of shame. He was calculating. When Kane stayed quiet longer than usual, it meant he was preparing a move that would benefit him. And that move showed up on a Tuesday night, right after dinner, while I was clearing the table. Kane stood leaning against the counter, arms crossed like he held some built-in authority. I think, he began, voice cold, we should shift financial control to me. I make more money. It just makes sense. Reasonable. That word fell out of Kane's mouth as light as paper, but there were nails underneath it. I set the plate down and looked at him a beat longer. I could see exactly what he wasn't saying. If he controlled the finances, he'd control everything, including who had a say in this house. I saw the danger right away. He thought I'd nod just to avoid an argument. I simply said, no. Soft, but enough to make him pause. And in that moment, I knew Kane was hiding something bigger than hotel bills and the gifts he bought for Lara. A man who needs financial control usually isn't trying to manage things. He's trying to cover a hole. That night, after Kane went to bed, I stayed in the living room. I opened my laptop and logged into our joint bank account. I wasn't snooping. This was an account under both our names, and the money inside was something that could pull me down too if Kane did something reckless. The numbers came up, and it only took a few minutes to see the layer of dust Kane had tried to throw over the truth. A string of personal loans, credit card debt not just $3,000, almost $12,000, a fast loan with high interest and heavy penalties for late payments, an installment plan for something I'd never seen in the house. I leaned back in the chair. It didn't feel like shock. It felt like confirmation. Kane hadn't just cheated on me emotionally. He'd compromised our financial safety too. And he did it quietly, like I was someone who couldn't see. I opened every transaction, every date, every detail. Each charge was a slice of truth. Luxury hotels, a jewelry store, restaurants that averaged $200 for two. None of it had anything to do with me. I was the one paying the electric and water bills. Lara was the one getting gifts and expensive dinners. I started gathering evidence, credit card statements, spending history, debt reminder emails Kane forgot to delete. I saved every file, every page, every piece of proof. There was no anger in my hands, just clarity. The next day, I brought a few documents to work. During lunch break, I met with Rhea, the co-worker who'd sat next to me for 3 years. Rhea was the quiet type, but she understood things quickly. You don't look okay, she said, soft but sharp. I handed her a few copies of the documents. She looked them over, brow tightening. Talia, if these debts are in his name, but the house is in both of yours, you have the right to protect yourself. If everything crashes, creditors will come after the assets he lives in, and that includes your house. I sat still, not out of fear, but because her words locked in the final piece of the puzzle. Kane wasn't just spending money on Lara. He was overspending, then trying to take control of the finances so he could push the risk onto me. I nodded and thanked Rhea. No complaints, no venting. Just a confirmation of the path I needed to take. That evening, when Kane walked into the house with that unshaken confidence of his, I knew it was time. I waited for him to drop his coat on the chair. I waited for him to pour himself a drink. I waited for him to sit on the sofa and look at me with the eyes of someone who still thought he controlled everything. We need to talk, I said. He leaned back, ready for a conversation he was sure he'd win. "Go ahead," Kane said. "I just want everything clear. Besides, this house will be mine if we ever divorce." The confidence in that line didn't bother me. It only showed me his blind spot. He truly believed he was untouchable. I set a stack of papers on the table. He glanced down. He didn't blink, but his chest rose a little faster. Debt statements, spending history, past due emails stamped in red like warnings. Kane picked up the first page. His face changed by the second. I spoke, my voice so calm it made him look at me twice. "You're in so much debt that if I bring this to court, they'll review the assets you live in. That includes this house." I didn't press the point. I didn't shout. I didn't mock him. I just stated the truth. And the truth, when it's cold, cuts sharper than any insult. For the first time, Kane lost his composure. He shot to his feet. "Quote, you went through my accounts? You're spying on me? You're trying to ruin me?" Each line was a stone he threw at a wall, only to have it bounce back and land at his own feet. I didn't react. I didn't step back. I didn't raise my voice. "I don't have to do anything," I said. "The numbers speak on their own." And Kane knew I was right. For the first time, he understood that the power he thought he had never existed. From the night I laid the debt papers in front of him, Kane started to change. Not in a good way. In the way of someone who smells smoke under their feet but tries to look calm. He went silent for a day, then two, then started responding to everything I said with a softer tone. But that softness didn't sway me. It only confirmed he was afraid, and I knew I had to take the next step. I scheduled a meeting with a legal advisor. The woman sitting across from me had a calm face, sharp eyes, and the first thing she asked was, "Do you want to protect the house or separate yourself from your husband's debt?" "I want both," I said. I handed her everything: the credit card debt, the fast loan, the installment plan, the spending history. She looked through each page, not surprised at all, like she'd seen far too many men hide debt behind their affairs. "The bad news is this: if he keeps living in the house, his debt can put the shared property at risk," she said. "And the good news?" I asked. "If you can prove you're the primary one paying for the house utilities, taxes, maintenance, you have priority rights to stay. From there, now you can request that he leave in order to protect the legal value of the property." She paused, studying me more closely. "You don't need to fight him. You just need to show him the only path he has left is the front door." A simple line, but it was the moment everything shifted into the revenge phase I'd been waiting for. Kane started begging not long after I met with the advisor. Not with affection. He didn't know how to do that. He tried with small, clumsy changes that showed more fear than remorse. One night while I was working, Kane stood in the doorway, fiddling with his car keys like he didn't know where to put his hands. "Talia, can we talk?" I didn't turn around. "Go ahead." He swallowed. "If you're upset about that night, I'm sorry I went too far." I kept my eyes on the laptop screen. "It's not about that night, Kane. It's about you living on debt." Silence. The kind that comes from someone who knows he's been seen through. I just got confused. "Work's been hard lately. I don't want to lose you." Well, that line, if I'd heard it a year earlier, might have softened me. But now, all I saw was the emptiness behind it. There was no real feeling, just fear of being exposed. For the first time, Kane needed me more than I needed him, and the power between us had flipped without him noticing when it happened. I closed my laptop, set my hand on the edge of the table. "I have a condition," I said, my voice flat. Kane straightened, like he was expecting some kind of compromise. But what I gave him wasn't a compromise. "Either you move out of this house, or I take this to court and let the creditors handle the rest." Kane's eyes tightened. He tried to smile, but his mouth wouldn't move. "Talia, you're overreacting." Every couple goes through rough patches. We can. There's no we in this, I said. There's just you and the debt in your name. My voice stayed calm, but nothing in the meaning was gentle. 3 days later, the turning point arrived on its own. A new envelope came in the mail. I opened it, and just as the advisor predicted, one of Kane's quick loans was about to hit its payment deadline. If he didn't pay, it would automatically move into an ability to pay review, which meant they'd evaluate the assets he was using, and that asset was this house. I left the letter on the table. Kane saw it as he walked by, his face drained, and like someone had pulled all the blood out of him. This is a system error, he stammered. No, I said. This is the cost of the life you chose. Kane picked up the letter, his hand shaking. For the first time, the fear in him didn't hide behind an attitude. He understood that if this review went through, the house would be pulled into it, and he'd lose everything. That night, he knocked on my office door. Talia, talk to me. I'll change. I'll fix everything. There's nothing to fix, I said. Only something to clear out. I stood up and closed the door right in front of him, hearing his breath catch on the other side. I wasn't angry, just calm. Calm enough for him to realize he had no place left to stand. Kane spent the whole night in the living room, pacing like an animal backed into a corner. But I didn't look at him once. I let him wrestle with the one thing he'd always avoided, consequences. He packed his things the next morning. No arguing, no slamming drawers, no dramatic begging like in the movies. Kane just stood there, avoiding my eyes, putting his belongings into bags. His head hung lower than usual, like the neighbors could read his debt right off his forehead. When he pulled his suitcase to the door, his face turned away, hidden in the shadow of the doorway. As if the shameful part wasn't the affair or the debt he'd created, but the fact that he was being pushed out by the woman he'd spent years looking down on. I stood at the end of the hallway, saying nothing. There was nothing to say. He put the suitcase in the trunk, slammed it shut, and drove off. No glance back, no courage to look. And I watched the red taillights fade, then disappear down the street. No pain, no regret. Just an old chapter closing on its own. Kane left the house on a gray, misty morning, and I stood inside a space so quiet I could hear the clock on the wall. It wasn't the quiet of emptiness. It was the quiet of a door that had closed for good. I didn't sigh with relief. I just set my hand on the kitchen counter, right where he once stood, and called me a name he thought would break me. Now, nothing in this house belonged to him except a few empty spaces. That afternoon, I called my legal advisor. We finalized the paperwork to separate my financial responsibility from his. She walked me through every step to make sure Kane's debt wouldn't land on me, wouldn't threaten the house, wouldn't find a way to drag me down with him. I signed the documents with complete calm. There was nothing to celebrate. It was just a necessary step like fixing a loose brick. After that, I called a locksmith to change the locks. When he asked what kind I wanted, I just said, something secure. Not out of anger. I didn't have anything strong enough left to call anger. It was simply the last step to cut Kane out of my life in the literal sense. If he no longer had a way into this house, then his exit from my life was complete. That evening, I walked around the house, not checking for anything, not looking for his things, just feeling the air without the weight of Kane in it. The house could breathe, and so could I. I thought everything was closed for good until Kane came back the next afternoon. He knocked, not with anger, Mia, but with the sound of someone who knew he no longer had the right to stand at this door but still wanted to try his luck. Talia, open up. I'm just here to pick up a few things. I opened the door and stood right in the frame, not stepping back. Kane looked at me with eyes red from lack of sleep. The arrogance he always carried was gone, but a small trace of it still clung to him, shaky and desperate. You can't live here alone, he said, voice low, almost a whisper. You know that. I looked at him, straight, emotionless. I've been doing that for a long time, I said. You're just now noticing. That line stopped him, not because it was cruel, but because it was true. He glanced inside, as if trying to find some trace of himself in the house to reassure himself he still mattered here. But the house didn't reflect anything of him anymore. I stepped aside so he could collect his things. He moved quickly, avoiding my eyes, avoiding the objects he once claimed as his. When Kane stepped out for the last time, his hand gripped the bag strap like he was holding on to the last shred of dignity he had left. Talia. I turned my head slightly. He opened his mouth but didn't say anything. There was nothing left to say. He understood that even before I did. Kane left without slamming the door. He just pushed it gently, like he was afraid any loud sound would make the neighbors look over. His car started, backed out of the driveway, and disappeared. No final glance, no pause. The front door was still slightly open. I reached out and pushed it closed. The new lock clicked softly, clean and sure. That night, the house felt quiet in a different way. Not the quiet of tension, or the quiet of waiting for someone to come home. It was the quiet of knowing no one could hurt you in your own space anymore. I sat on the sofa, looking at the wall across from me. I didn't think about Kane. I didn't replay anything. I just sat there and realized one simple truth. I didn't feel victorious. There was no rush of satisfaction, just lightness. Light enough that I wondered how much weight I'd been carrying without noticing. I didn't push Kane out of this house. I didn't need to. He fell on his own, dug the hole himself, buried himself in debt, and let his own words become the hammer that broke his life apart. The truth was heavier than anything he ever said to me, and in the end, that truth pushed him out of this house without me lifting a finger. I looked around the room again, empty, clean, quiet. A chapter closed, not with a slammed door, but with the soft turn of a lock. And that was enough. What I learned is this. Sometimes strength isn't in how we fight back, but in standing steady in our own truth. Not everyone who leaves our life is a loss. Some people walk out so we can finally have back the peace that was always ours. That's the end of the story. Thank you for staying with me to the last moment. If you've ever felt dismissed or treated unfairly, what do you think you do in this situation? Share your thoughts in the comments so we can talk about it. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next story. Thank you, truly, for taking the time and trusting me through this journey.